Welcome to Finance Explains, the channel where we break down complex money topics into simple, easy to understand lessons. Whether you're just starting out or trying to make sense of the global economy, you're in the right place. In today's video, we're diving deep into a question many people ask. Why is every country in debt? Who do they owe, and why can't they just print more money? We'll explore this topic step by step, with real-world examples from national debt and hyperinflation to trade wars and what it all means for you as an investor. So if you're ready to understand the real story behind government debt in plain language, let's get started. In this video, we'll cover why governments borrow money, what national debt really means, in simple terms, why countries can't just print more money, which countries have the highest debt and how they repay it, real examples: Zimbabwe, Argentina, the USA, and more. What the US-China trade war means for debt and global power, how all of this affects you as a citizen and investor, whether a country can ever be completely debt-free. Section 1. Why do governments borrow money? Governments, just like people and businesses, don't always have enough money on hand to pay for everything they need. So what do? They borrow. But why? Let's break it down. Imagine a country is like a household. That household has regular income, like taxes. But sometimes it wants or needs to spend more than it brings in. Maybe it's building new roads, funding education, responding to a natural disaster, or supporting the economy during a crisis like COVID-19. That's when borrowing comes in. Governments borrow to fund essential services, like healthcare, military, and schools, invest in infrastructure, roads, bridges, energy, support the economy in hard times, stimulus spending, or cover deficits when tax revenue is not enough. This borrowing is often done by selling government bonds to investors. We'll explain that later. Now you might ask, why not just cut spending or raise taxes? Well, imagine telling millions of citizens, sorry, no more healthcare, or suddenly doubling taxes. Not very popular, right? Borrowing is a way for governments to spread out the cost of big projects over time, just like you'd take a loan to buy a house and pay it back over years instead of needing all the money up front. Sometimes, governments borrow even when the economy is doing well to invest in the future or take advantage of low interest rates. So, in short, governments borrow money to manage their budget, invest in growth, and respond to emergencies, all without putting sudden pressure on the economy or citizens. Section 2. What is national debt? Alright, so let's talk about national debt, but don't worry, I promise not to bore you to sleep like an old-school economics class. So, what is national debt? Think of it like this. When a government spends more money than it earns through taxes, it needs to make up the difference somehow. And surprise, it does that by borrowing. That borrowed money? That's called national debt. Simple. Now here's a fun way to imagine it. Imagine your government is a person. Let him Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam likes to throw big parties, healthcare parties, military parties, infrastructure parties, but he doesn't always have enough cash on hand. So he goes to the money people, investors, banks, even foreign countries and says, hey, lend me some cash. I'll pay you back later with a little interest. Boom. That's a government bond. And the total amount Uncle Sam owes? That's national debt. Now let's throw in some real numbers to make this less abstract. As of 2024, the United States has over $34 trillion in national debt. Japan is even wilder. Their debt is more than 200% of their GDP, their total yearly income as a country. Meanwhile, Germany is known for being more disciplined with debt. But here's the thing. Debt isn't always bad. If it's used wisely, like investing in education, clean energy, or public services, it can help a country grow stronger over time. But, and it's a big but, too much debt, mismanaged or borrowed for the wrong reasons, can lead to serious problems. Like what? You'll see soon when we talk about Zimbabwe and Argentina. Trust me, it gets dramatic. Sing. So to recap this part, national debt is the total amount a government owes because it spends more than it earns. It borrows money through bonds and owes it to citizens, banks, foreign investors, and sometimes even other countries. And no, sadly, you can't Venmo the government a few bucks to help out. Section 3. Why can't countries just print more money? Okay, so you might be thinking, wait, if countries need money, why don't they just, print more of it? Like, isn't that the perk of having a money printer? Brr, sounds simple, right? But no. Big mistake. Huge. Let's break this down like you're 5. Imagine you're at a birthday party. There's cake. Everyone gets one slice. Now, let's say someone walks in with a second cake, but this one is made of paper and just looks like cake. More slices? Yes. More real cake? Nope. Just confusion and a fight between a kid and his aunt. That's what happens when a country just prints money. You're adding more paper, but not more value. The result? Prices go up. And up. And up. That's called inflation. And if they really overdo it, that's called hyperinflation. Let me tell you a real-life horror story. Zimbabwe, 2008. The government printed so much money that they had $100 trillion bills. Yes, that's trillion with a T. You'd need a wheelbarrow full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread. Not even exaggerating. People stopped counting money, they weighed it. The economy collapsed. Savings became worthless overnight. Trust? Gone. Or let's look at Argentina, a country that defaulted on its debt 9 times in modern history. They printed money to try and solve their problems, and surprise, they created more problems. The point is, printing money doesn't create more value, it just makes your existing money worth less. Imagine if your bank suddenly emailed you, "Hey, we doubled your balance, but also, a coffee now costs $72. Not helpful. So why don't they print money? Because it destroys trust in the currency, wrecks the economy, and turns savings into tissue paper. Instead, smart governments borrow responsibly, spend wisely, at least in theory, and use central banks to keep inflation in check. Printing money feels like a cheat code, but in the real world, it's a trapdoor to chaos. Section 4. Which countries carry the most debt, and what does it mean for their citizens? All right, time to peek at the world's credit card statement. Spoiler. It's not cute. Let's start with the top debt-heavy countries by absolute numbers, meaning not just who owes the most compared to their economy, but who's racking up the biggest bill in total. 1. The United States. Debt. Over $34 trillion. Yep, trillion with a T. If debt were a person, the US would be that friend who keeps saying, "It's fine, I'll pay it off eventually." Except, eventually never really comes. Now, how does the US manage this debt? Well, mostly through treasury bonds. These are like IOUs sold to investors, including countries like China and Japan. They also pay off old debt by, wait for it, taking on new debt. It's like using one credit card to pay off another. But guess who really pays for this debt over time? Goebling. Us. The taxpayers. Because the government eventually has to raise taxes, cut services, or let inflation creep up and eat into your purchasing power. 2. Japan. Debt. Over 260% of their GDP. That means they owe more than double what they make in a year. But plot twist, Japan isn't freaking out. Why? Because most of their debt is domestic, owed to their own people and institutions. Interest rates are super low, and Japan has a strong savings culture. Think of Japan like a guy who owes a lot on paper, but he owes it to his own family, who trusts him and isn't charging interest. 3. Italy. Debt. Around 140% of GDP. Italy's debt problem has been a hot potato for years. Every few years, markets panic about whether Italy can pay it off. Why? Because economic growth is slow, youth unemployment is high, and political instability doesn't help either. So what does all this mean for the average citizen? Well, if you're living in a high-debt country, you might see taxes go up. Public services could shrink. Inflation could hit your wallet hard. Investment in your future, like schools, healthcare, roads, may take a back seat. And here's the worst part. High national debt reduces flexibility. When the next crisis hits like a pandemic, war, or financial meltdown, there's less wiggle room to act fast. Imagine you're maxed out on 5 credit cards, and then your car breaks down. That's how a heavily indebted country feels during a global crisis. Coming up next, let's connect all this with what's happening right now, the US-China trade war, the bond market, and how it all affects you as an investor. Ready for that deep dive? Section 5. Debt, trade wars, and the investor's reality. What's going on with the US and China? Okay, so we've seen that countries borrow money like it's going out of style. But now, let's zoom in on the two economic titans of the modern world. The United States and Bailey China. And oh boy, they're not exactly besties at the moment. What's a trade war anyway? A trade war is basically two countries saying, you tax my stuff, I'll tax your stuff harder. The US and China have been throwing tariffs at each other like dodgeballs since 2018. Why? The US accuses China of unfair trade practices. China claps back saying the US is just trying to slow them down. And guess what? This back and forth doesn't just hurt the governments, it hits consumers and investors too. Prices on imported goods go up. Supply chains get messy. Markets become shaky. But what does this have to do with debt? Glad you asked. When the US puts tariffs on China, and vice versa, it messes with trade, and that means lower economic growth, lower tax revenues, higher budget deficits. And when deficits rise, you guessed it, countries borrow more. More debt, more IOUs, more interest. It's like fighting with your neighbor, then realizing you both share a bank account. And where does the bond market come in? Bonds are how governments borrow money. And right now, the US bond market is huge. Investors buy US bonds because they're considered safe. But as debt piles up and interest rates climb to fight inflation, investors start asking, hey, can you still afford to pay us back? If trust drops, bond yields rise, borrowing becomes more expensive, and suddenly the US is paying more just to stay afloat. It's like having to pay 25% interest on your loan instead of 3%. Ouch. So, what does this mean for you, the everyday investor? You're probably wondering, okay, cool story, but how does this affect my wallet? Here's how. Market volatility. Trade tensions and rising debt spook markets. You might see wild ups and downs in your portfolio. Investment strategy. Bonds might seem safer now, but be cautious. If interest rates keep rising, older bonds lose value. Currency value. More debt equals weaker currency equals inflation equals your money buys less. Opportunities in chaos. Some investors thrive in times like this, buying undervalued stocks or investing in gold, real estate, or other safe havens. Let's wrap it up with some real talk. Governments borrow because they need to fund big things like infrastructure, defense, or even just keeping the lights on. But too much debt? It's like overeating pizza feels good now, but the heartburn's coming. Trade wars complicate the equation, slowing down growth and pressuring already stretched budgets. The bond market is where countries beg for loans, and when faith drops, rates rise. And as an investor, you need to stay informed. Because what happens in Washington, Beijing, or Brussels eventually hits your portfolio. Wrapping it all up. Finance one-to-one style. All right, folks. Whew. We've been through national debt, money printing nightmares, trade wars, and even took a detour through Zimbabwe's billion-dollar bread economy. So let's hit the rewind real quick. Governments borrow money when tax revenues fall short, like a student surviving on ramen and loans. They can't just print more money unless they want to host the next season of Hyperinflation, Global Edition. The US and China are in a power struggle, and it's messing with trade, debt, and your favorite gadgets being $200 more expensive than they should be. And if you're wondering how it all affects you as an investor, well, now you know. Money moves at the top, change everything at the bottom. And hey, if some of that made your head spin a bit, you're not alone. Even some politicians don't know how bonds work. Let's not name names, but you know who you are. Can't we just print more money? Sure, and I can just print a six-pack on my stomach too. Doesn't mean it's gonna work. So here's the deal. If today's episode helped you make sense of this wild world of finance, give it a like. It tells the YouTube algorithm, hey, this video isn't garbage. And hit that subscribe button because we've got more money wisdom coming at you one-to-one every week. And if anything was confusing, drop a comment like, wait, explain the bond thing again like I'm 5. I'll be right there in the replies breaking it down for you. Until next time, stay smart, stay curious, and remember, money talks. But you decide what it says. Peace out from Finance Explains 1-to-1.